Autobiography of a Yogi. By Paramahansa Yogananda. Chapter 39. Therese Newman, the Catholic Stigmatist. Return to India. I have waited for you patiently for 15 years. Soon I shall swim out of the body and onto the shining abode. Yogananda, come. Sri Yukteswar's voice sounded startlingly in my inner ear as I sat in meditation at my MT. Washington headquarters. Traversing 10,000 miles in the twinkling of an eye, his message penetrated my being like a flash of lightning. 15 years. Yes, I realized, now it is 1935, I have spent 15 years in spreading my guru's teachings in America. Now he recalls me. That afternoon I recounted my experience to a visiting disciple. His spiritual development under Kriya Yoga was so remarkable that I often called him saint, remembering Babaji's prophecy that America too would produce men and women of divine realization through the ancient yogic path. This disciple and a number of others generously insisted on making a donation for my travels. The financial problem thus solved, I made arrangements to sail, via Europe, for India. Busy weeks of preparations at Mount Washington. In March 1935 I had the Self-Realization Fellowship chartered under the laws of the state of California as a non-profit corporation. To this educational institution go all public donations as well as the revenue from the sale of my books, magazine, written courses, class tuition, and every other source of income. I shall be back, I told my students. Never shall I forget America. At a farewell banquet given to me in Los Angeles by loving friends, I looked long at their faces and thought gratefully, Lord, he who remembers thee as the sole giver will never lack the sweetness of friendship among mortals. I sailed from New York on June 9, 1935 in the Europa. 2 students accompanied me, my secretary, Mr. C. Richard Wright, and an elderly lady from Cincinnati, Miss Etty Bletch. We enjoyed the days of ocean peace, a welcome contrast to the past hurried weeks. Our period of leisure was short-lived, the speed of modern boats has some regrettable features. Like any other group of inquisitive tourists, we walked around the huge and ancient city of London. The following day I was invited to address a large meeting in Caxton Hall, at which I was introduced to the London audience by Sir Francis Younghusband. Our party spent a pleasant day as guests of Sir Harry Lauder at his estate in Scotland. We soon crossed the English Channel to the continent, for I wanted to make a special pilgrimage to Bavaria. This would be my only chance, I felt, to visit the great Catholic mystic, Therese Newman of Connersreuth. Years earlier I had read an amazing account of Therese. Information given in the article was as follows. 1. Therese, born in 1898, had been injured in an accident at the age of 20, she became blind and paralyzed. 2. She miraculously regained her sight in 1923 through prayers to St. Teresa, the Little Flower. Later Therese Newman's limbs were instantaneously healed. 3. From 1923 onward, Therese has abstained completely from food and drink, except for the daily swallowing of one small consecrated wafer. 4. The stigmata, or sacred wounds of Christ, appeared in 1926 on Therese's head, breast, hands, and feet. On Friday of every week thereafter, she has passed through the Passion of Christ, suffering in her own body all his historic agonies. 5. Knowing ordinarily only the simple German of her village, during her Friday trances Therese utters phrases which scholars have identified as ancient Aramaic. At appropriate times in her vision, she speaks Hebrew or Greek. 6. By ecclesiastical permission, Therese has several times been under close scientific observation. Dr. Fritz Gerlich, editor of a Protestant German newspaper, went to Connersreuth to expose the Catholic fraud, but ended up by reverently writing her biography. As always, whether in East or West, I was eager to meet a saint. I rejoiced as our little party entered, on July 16, the quaint village of Konnersreuth. The Bavarian peasants exhibited lively interest in our Ford automobile, brought with us from America, and its assorted group: an American young man, an elderly lady, and an olive-hued Oriental with long hair tucked under his coat collar. Teresa's little cottage, clean and neat, with geraniums blooming by a primitive well, was alas silently closed. The neighbors, and even the village postman who passed by, could give us no information. Rain began to fall. My companions suggested that we leave. "No," I said stubbornly, "I will stay here until I find some clue leading to Therese." 2 hours later we were still sitting in our car amidst the dismal rain. "Lord," I sighed complainingly, "why didst thou lead me here if she has disappeared?" An English-speaking man halted beside us, politely offering his aid. "I don't know for certain where Therese is," he said, "but she often visits at the home of Professor Wers, a seminary master of Eichstätt, 80 miles from here." The following morning our party motored to the quiet village of Eichstätt, narrowly lined with cobblestone streets. Dr. Wers greeted us cordially at his home. "Yes, Therese is here." He sent her word of the visitors. A messenger soon appeared with her reply. "Though the bishop has asked me to see no one without his permission, I will receive the man of God from India." Deeply touched at these words, I followed Dr. Wers upstairs to the sitting room. Therese entered immediately, radiating an aura of peace and joy. She wore a black gown and spotless white head dress. Although her age was 37 at this time, she seemed much younger, possessing indeed a childlike freshness and charm. Healthy, well-formed, rosy-cheeked, and cheerful, this is the saint that does not eat. Therese greeted me with a very gentle handshaking. We both beamed in silent communion, each knowing the other to be a lover of God. Dr. Wers kindly offered to serve as interpreter. As we seated ourselves, I noticed that Therese was glancing at me with naive curiosity. Evidently Hindus had been rare in Bavaria. "Don't you eat anything?" I wanted to hear the answer from her own lips. "No, except a consecrated rice flour wafer, once every morning at 6 o'clock. "How large is the wafer?" "It is paper thin, the size of a small coin." She added, "I take it for sacramental reasons. If it is unconsecrated, I am unable to swallow it." "Certainly you could not have lived on that, for 12 whole years." "I live by God's light." How simple her reply, how Einsteinian. "I see you realize that energy flows to your body from the ether, sun, and air." A swift smile broke over her face. "I am so happy to know you understand how I live. Your sacred life is a daily demonstration of the truth uttered by Christ. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God." Again she showed joy at my explanation. "It is indeed so. One of the reasons I am here on earth today is to prove that man can live by God's invisible light, and not by food only." "Can you teach others how to live without food?" She appeared a trifle shocked. "I cannot do that, God does not wish it." As my gaze fell on her strong, graceful hands, Therese showed me a little, square, freshly healed wound on each of her palms. On the back of each hand, she pointed out a smaller, crescent-shaped wound, freshly healed. Each wound went straight through the hand. The sight brought to my mind distinct recollection of the large square iron nails with crescent-tipped ends, still used in the Orient, but which I do not recall having seen in the West. The saint told me something of her weekly trances. As a helpless onlooker, I observed the whole passion of Christ. Each week, from Thursday midnight until Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock, her wounds open and bleed, she loses 10 pounds of her ordinary 121-pound weight. Suffering intensely in her sympathetic love, Therese yet looks forward joyously to these weekly visions of her Lord. I realized at once that her strange life is intended by God to reassure all Christians of the historical authenticity of Jesus' life and crucifixion as recorded in the New Testament, and to dramatically display the ever-living bond between the Galilean master and his devotees. Professor Wurz related some of his experiences with the saint. Several of us, including Therese, often travel for days on sightseeing trips throughout Germany, he told me. It is a striking contrast. While we have 3 meals a day, Therese eats nothing. She remains as fresh as a rose, untouched by the fatigue which the trips cause us. As we grow hungry and hunt for wayside inns, she laughs merrily. The professor added some interesting physiological details. Because Therese takes no food, her stomach has shrunk. She has no excretions, but her perspiration glands function, her skin is always soft and firm. At the time of parting, I expressed to Therese my desire to be present at her trance. "Yes, please come to Konnersreuth next Friday," she said graciously. "The bishop will give you a permit. I am very happy you sought me out in Eichstätt." Therese shook hands gently, many times, and walked with our party to the gate. Mr. Wright turned on the automobile radio, the saint examined it with little enthusiastic chuckles. Such a large crowd of youngsters gathered that Therese retreated into the house. We saw her at a window, where she peered at us, childlike, waving her hand. From a conversation the next day with 2 of Therese's brothers, very kind and amiable, we learned that the saint sleeps only 1 or 2 hours at night. In spite of the many wounds in her body, she is active and full of energy. She loves birds, looks after an aquarium of fish, and works often in her garden. Her correspondence is large. Catholic devotees write her for prayers and healing blessings. Many seekers have been cured through her of serious diseases. Her brother Ferdinand, about 23, explained that Therese has the power, through prayer, of working out on her own body the ailments of others. The saint's abstinence from food dates from a time when she prayed that the throat disease of a young man of her parish, then preparing to enter holy orders, be transferred to her own throat. On Thursday afternoon our party drove to the home of the bishop, who looked at my flowing locks with some surprise. He readily wrote out the necessary permit. There was no fee. The rule made by the church is simply to protect Therese from the onrush of casual tourists, who in previous years had flocked on Fridays by the thousands. We arrived Friday morning about 9:30 in Konnersreuth. I noticed that Therese's little cottage possesses a special glass-roofed section to afford her plenty of light. We were glad to see the doors no longer closed, but wide open in hospitable cheer. There was a line of about 20 visitors, armed with their permits. Many had come from great distances to view the mystic trance. Therese had passed my first test at the professor's house by her intuitive knowledge that I wanted to see her for spiritual reasons, and not just to satisfy a passing curiosity. My second test was connected with the fact that, just before I went upstairs to her room, I put myself into a yogic trance state in order to be one with her in telepathic and televisic rapport. I entered her chamber, filled with visitors. She was lying in a white robe on the bed. With Mr. Wright following closely behind me, I halted just inside the threshold, awestruck at a strange and most frightful spectacle. Blood flowed thinly and continuously in an inch-wide stream from Therese's lower eyelids. Her gaze was focused upward on the spiritual eye within the central forehead. The cloth wrapped around her head was drenched in blood from the stigmata wounds of the crown of thorns. The white garment was redly splotched over her heart from the wound in her side at the spot where Christ's body, long ages ago, had suffered the final indignity of the soldier's spear thrust. Teresa's hands were extended in a gesture maternal, pleading. Her face wore an expression both tortured and divine. She appeared thinner, changed in many subtle as well as outward ways. Murmuring words in a foreign tongue, she spoke with slightly quivering lips to persons visible before her inner sight. As I was in attunement with her, I began to see the scenes of her vision. She was watching Jesus as he carried the cross amidst the jeering multitude. Suddenly she lifted her head in consternation. The Lord had fallen under the cruel weight. The vision disappeared. In the exhaustion of fervid pity, Therese sank heavily against her pillow. At this moment I heard a loud thud behind me. Turning my head for a second, I saw two men carrying out a prostrate body. But because I was coming out of the deep superconscious state, I did not immediately recognize the fallen person. Again I fixed my eyes on Teresa's face, deathly pale under the rivulets of blood, but now calm, radiating purity and holiness. I glanced behind me later and saw Mr. Wright standing with his hand against his cheek, from which blood was trickling. "Dick," I inquired anxiously, "were you the one who fell?" "Yes," I fainted at the terrifying spectacle. "Well," I said consolingly, "you are brave to return and look upon the sight again." Remembering the patiently waiting line of pilgrims, Mr. Wright and I silently bade farewell to Therese and left her sacred presence. The following day our little group motored south, thankful that we were not dependent on trains, but could stop the Ford wherever we chose throughout the countryside. We enjoyed every minute of a tour through Germany, Holland, France, and the Swiss Alps. In Italy we made a special trip to Assisi to honor the Apostle of Humility, St. Francis. The European tour ended in Greece, where we viewed the Athenian temples, and saw the prison in which the gentle Socrates had drunk his death potion. One is filled with admiration for the artistry with which the Greeks have everywhere wrought their very fancies in alabaster. We took ship over the sunny Mediterranean, disembarking at Palestine. Wandering day after day over the Holy Land, I was more than ever convinced of the value of pilgrimage. The Spirit of Christ is all-pervasive in Palestine. I walked reverently by his side at Bethlehem, Gethsemane, Calvary, the Holy Mount of Olives, and by the River Jordan and the Sea of Galilee. Our little party visited the birth manger, Joseph's carpenter's shop, the tomb of Lazarus, the house of Martha and Mary, the hall of the Last Supper. Antiquity unfolded, scene by scene, I saw the divine drama that Christ once played for the ages. On to Egypt, with its modern Cairo and ancient pyramids. Then a boat down the narrow Red Sea, over the vasty Arabian Sea, lo, India. Autobiography of a Yogi. By Paramahansa Yogananda. Chapter 40. I returned to India. Gratefully I was inhaling the blessed air of India. Our boat Rajputana docked on August 22, 1935 in the huge harbour of Bombay. Even this, my first day off the ship, was a foretaste of the year ahead, 12 months of ceaseless activity. Friends had gathered at the dock with garlands and greetings. Soon, at our suite in the Taj Mahal Hotel, there was a stream of reporters and photographers. Bombay was a city new to me. I found it energetically modern, with many innovations from the West. Palms line the spacious boulevards, magnificent state structures vie for interest with ancient temples. Very little time was given to sightseeing, however. I was impatient, eager to see my beloved Guru and other dear ones. Consigning the Ford to a baggage car, our party was soon speeding eastward by train toward Calcutta. Our arrival at Howrah station found such an immense crowd assembled to greet us that for a while we were unable to dismount from the train. The young Maharaja of Qasim Bazar and my brother Bishnu headed the reception committee. I was unprepared for the warmth and magnitude of our welcome. Preceded by a line of automobiles and motorcycles, and amidst the joyous sound of drums and conch shells, Miss Bletch, Mr. Wright, and myself, flower garland from head to foot, drove slowly to my father's home. My aged parent embraced me as one returning from the dead. Long we gazed on each other, speechless with joy. Brothers and sisters, uncles, aunts, and cousins, students and friends of years long past were grouped around me, not a dry eye among us. Passed now into the archives of memory, the scene of loving reunion vividly endures, unforgettable in my heart. As for my meeting with Sri Yukteswar, words fail me. Let the following description from my secretary suffice. Today, filled with the highest anticipations, I drove Yoganandaji from Calcutta to Serampore, Mr. Wright recorded in his travel diary. We passed by quaint shops, one of them the favorite eating haunt of Yoganandaji during his college days, and finally entered a narrow, walled lane. A sudden left turn, and there before us towered the simple but inspiring two-story ashram, its Spanish-style balcony jutting from the upper floor. The pervasive impression was that of peaceful solitude. In grave humility I walked behind Yoganandaji into the courtyard within the hermitage walls. Hearts beating fast, we proceeded up some old cement steps, trod, no doubt, by myriads of truth-seekers. The tension grew keener and keener as on we strode. Before us, near the head of the stairs, quietly appeared the Great One, Swami Sri Yukteswarji, standing in the noble pose of a sage. My heart heaved and swelled as I felt myself blessed by the privilege of being in his sublime presence. Tears blurred my eager sight when Yoganandaji dropped to his knees, and with bowed head offered his soul's gratitude and greeting, touching with his hand his guru's feet and then, in humble obeisance, his own head. He rose then and was embraced on both sides of the bosom by Sri Yukteswarji. No words passed at the beginning, but the most intense feeling was expressed in the mute phrases of the soul. How their eyes sparkled and were fired with the warmth of renewed soul union. A tender vibration surged through the quiet patio, and even the sun eluded the clouds to add a sudden blaze of glory. On bended knee before the Master I gave my own unexpressed love and thanks, touching his feet, calloused by time and service, and receiving his blessing. I stood then and faced two beautiful deep eyes smoldering with introspection, yet radiant with joy. We entered his sitting room, whose whole side opened to the outer balcony first seen from the street. The Master braced himself against a worn davenport, sitting on a covered mattress on the cement floor. Yoganandaji and I sat near the Guru's feet, with orange-colored pillows to lean against and ease our positions on the straw mat. I tried and tried to penetrate the Bengali conversation between the two Swamijis, for English, I discovered, is null and void when they are together, although Swamiji Maharaj, as the great Guru is called by others, can and often does speak it. But I perceived the saintliness of the Great One through his heart-warming smile and twinkling eyes. One quality easily discernible in his merry, serious conversation is a decided positiveness in statement, the mark of a wise man, who knows he knows, because he knows God. His great wisdom, strength of purpose, and determination are apparent in every way. Studying him reverently from time to time, I noted that he is of large, athletic stature, hardened by the trials and sacrifices of renunciation. His poise is majestic. A decidedly sloping forehead, as if seeking the heavens, dominates his divine countenance. He has a rather large and homely nose, with which he amuses himself in idle moments, flipping and wiggling it with his fingers, like a child. His powerful dark eyes are haloed by an ethereal blue ring. His hair, parted in the middle, begins as silver and changes to streaks of silvery gold and silvery black, ending in ringlets at his shoulders. His beard and mustache are scant or thinned out, yet seem to enhance his features and, like his character, are deep and light at the same time. He has a jovial and rollicking laugh which comes from deep in his chest, causing him to shake and quiver throughout his body, very cheerful and sincere. His face and stature are striking in their power, as are his muscular fingers. He moves with a dignified tread and erect posture. He was clad simply in the common dhoti and shirt, both once dyed a strong ochre color, but now a faded orange. Glancing about, I observed that this rather dilapidated room suggested the owner's non-attachment to material comforts. The weather-stained white walls of the long chamber were streaked with fading blue plaster. At one end of the room hung a picture of Lahiri Mahasaya, garlanded in simple devotion. There was also an old picture showing Yoganandaji as he had first arrived in Boston, standing with the other delegates to the Congress of Religions. I noted a quaint concurrence of modernity and antiquation. A huge, cut glass, candle-light chandelier was covered with cobwebs through disuse, and on the wall was a bright, up-to-date calendar. The whole room emanated a fragrance of peace and calmness. Beyond the balcony I could see coconut trees towering over the hermitage in silent protection. It is interesting to observe that the master has merely to clap his hands together and, before finishing, he is served or attended by some small disciple. Incidentally, I am much attracted to one of the May thin lad, named Prafulla, with long black hair to his shoulders, a most penetrating pair of sparkling black eyes, and a heavenly smile. His eyes twinkle, as the corners of his mouth rise, like the stars and the crescent moon appearing at twilight. Swami Sri Yukteswarji's joy is obviously intense at the return of his product, and he seems to be somewhat inquisitive about the product's product. However, predominance of the wisdom aspect in the Great One's nature hinders his outward expression of feeling. Yoganandaji presented him with some gifts, as is the custom when the disciple returns to his guru. We sat down later to a simple but well-cooked meal. All the dishes were vegetable and rice combinations. Sri Yukteswarji was pleased at my use of a number of Indian customs, finger eating for example. After several hours of flying Bengali phrases and the exchange of warm smiles and joyful glances, we paid obeisance at his feet, bade adieu with a pranam, and departed for Calcutta with an everlasting memory of a sacred meeting and greeting. Although I write chiefly of my external impressions of him, yet I was always conscious of the true basis of the saint, his spiritual glory. I felt his power, and shall carry that feeling as my divine blessing. From America, Europe, and Palestine I had brought many presents for Sri Yukteswar. He received them smilingly, but without remark. For my own use, I had bought in Germany a combination umbrella cane. In India I decided to give the cane to Master. This gift I appreciate indeed. My guru's eyes were turned on me with affectionate understanding as he made the unwonted comment. From all the presents, it was the cane that he singled out to display to visitors. Master, please permit me to get a new carpet for the sitting room. I had noticed that Sri Yukteswar's tiger skin was placed over a torn rug. Do so if it pleases you. My guru's voice was not enthusiastic. Behold, my tiger mat is nice and clean, I am monarch in my own little kingdom. Beyond it is the vast world, interested only in externals. As he uttered these words I felt the years roll back. Once again I am a young disciple, purified in the daily fires of chastisement. As soon as I could tear myself away from Serampuri and Calcutta, I set out, with Mr. Wright, for Ranchi. What a welcome there, a veritable ovation. Tears stood in my eyes as I embraced the selfless teachers who had kept the banner of the school flying during my 15 years' absence. The bright faces and happy smiles of the residential and day students were ample testimony to the worth of their many-sided school and yoga training. Yet, alas, the Ranchi institution was in dire financial difficulties. Sir Munindra Chandranandi, the old Maharaja whose Kasim Bazar palace had been converted into the central school building, and who had made many princely donations, was now dead. Many free, benevolent features of the school were now seriously endangered for lack of sufficient public support. I had not spent years in America without learning some of its practical wisdom, its undaunted spirit before obstacles. For 1 week I remained in Ranchi, wrestling with critical problems. Then came interviews in Calcutta with prominent leaders and educators, a long talk with the young Maharaja of Kasim Bazar, a financial appeal to my father, and lo! The shaky foundations of Ranchi began to be righted. Many donations, including one huge check, arrived in the nick of time from my American students. Within a few months after my arrival in India, I had the joy of seeing the Ranchi school legally incorporated. My lifelong dream of a permanently endowed yoga educational center stood fulfilled. That vision had guided me in the humble beginnings in 1917 with a group of 7 boys. In the decade since 1935, Ranchi has enlarged its scope far beyond the boys' school. Widespread humanitarian activities are now carried on there in the Shyamacharan Lahari Mahasaya mission. The school, or Yogita Satsanga Brahmakarya Vidyalaya, conducts outdoor classes in grammar and high school subjects. The residential students and day scholars also receive vocational training of some kind. The boys themselves regulate most of their activities through autonomous committees. Very early in my career as an educator, I discovered that boys who impishly delight in outwitting a teacher will cheerfully accept disciplinary rules that are set by their fellow students. Never a model pupil myself, I had a ready sympathy for all boyish pranks and problems. Sports and games are encouraged, the fields resound with hockey and football practice. Ranchi students often win the cup at competitive events. The outdoor gymnasium is known far and wide. Muscle recharging through willpower is the Yogita feature, mental direction of life energy to any part of the body. The boys are also taught asanas, postures, sword and lathi, stick, play, and jujitsu. The Yogita health exhibitions at the Ranchi Vidyalaya have been attended by thousands. Instruction in primary subjects is given in Hindi to the Kols, Santals, and Mundas, Aboriginal tribes of the province. Classes for girls only have been organized in nearby villages. The unique feature at Ranchi is the initiation into Kriya Yoga. The boys daily practice their spiritual exercises, engage in Gita chanting, and are taught by precept and example the virtues of simplicity, self-sacrifice, honor, and truth. Evil is pointed out to them as being that which produces misery, good as those actions which result in true happiness. Evil may be compared to poisoned honey, tempting but laden with death. Overcoming restlessness of body and mind by concentration techniques has achieved astonishing results. It is no novelty at Ranchi to see an appealing little figure, aged 9 or 10 years, sitting for an hour or more in unbroken poise, the unwinking gaze directed to the spiritual eye. Often the picture of these Ranchi students has returned to my mind, as I observed collegians over the world who are hardly able to sit still through one class period. Ranchi lies 2,000 feet above sea level, the climate is mild and equable. The 25-acre site, by a large bathing pond, includes one of the finest orchards in India. 500 fruit trees: mango, guava, lychee, jackfruit, date. The boys grow their own vegetables, and spin at their churkas. A guest house is hospitably open for Western visitors. The Ranchi library contains numerous magazines, and about 1,000 volumes in English and Bengali, donations from the West and the East. there is a collection of the scriptures of the world. A well-classified museum displays archaeological, geological, and anthropological exhibits, trophies, to a great extent, of my wanderings over the Lord's varied earth. The charitable hospital and dispensary of the Lahiri Mahasaya mission, with many outdoor branches in distant villages, have already ministered to 150,000 of India's poor. The Ranchi students are trained in first aid, and have given praiseworthy service to their province at tragic times of flood or famine. In the orchard stands a Shiva temple, with the statue of the Blessed Master, Lahiri Mahasaya. Daily prayers and scripture classes are held in the garden under the mango bowers. Branch high schools, with the residential and yoga features of Ranchi, have been opened and are now flourishing. These are the Yogita Satsanga Vidyapith School, for boys, at Lakshmanpur in Bihar, and the Yogita Satsanga High School and Hermitage at Ejmalichik in Midnapuri. A stately Yogita math was dedicated in 1939 at Dakshineshwar, directly on the Ganges. Only a few miles north of Calcutta, the new hermitage affords a haven of peace for city dwellers. Suitable accommodations are available for Western guests, and particularly for those seekers who are intensely dedicating their lives to spiritual realization. The activities of the Yogita Math include a fortnightly mailing of self-realization fellowship teachings to students in various parts of India. It is needless to say that all these educational and humanitarian activities have required the self-sacrificing service and devotion of many teachers and workers. I do not list their names here, because they are so numerous, but in my heart each one has a lustrous niche. Inspired by the ideals of Lahiri Mahasaya, these teachers have abandoned promising worldly goals to serve humbly, to give greatly. Mr. Wright formed many fast friendships with Ranchi boys. Clad in a simple dhoti, he lived for a while among them. At Ranchi, Calcutta, Serampuri, everywhere he went, my secretary, who has a vivid gift of description, hauled out his travel diary to record his adventures. One evening I asked him a question. "Dick, what is your impression of India?" "Peace," he said thoughtfully.